Hey everyone, my name is Cesar Mesquita. Once again, buenas tardes. Thank you for joining us here on our Admitted Student Day. I'm going to be covering some information here associated with understanding your aid letter from Western that you may have received, or perhaps you've received this information and seen it online. So I'm going to do a bit of screen share over here. So bear with me as I take care of the tech side of things. And we're going to go ahead and get started now. Okay, go back to the first slide over here and cover this information. Okay, so the learning outcomes of our session here today is certainly to understand the difference in cost versus aid and absolutely interpret the details in your aid letter with the goal ultimately of reducing information and absolutely welcome you to connect you with the aid resources here at Western. So when you talk about the aspect of cost, it's important for us to think about the distinction between direct and indirect costs. As you look at the top here, you can see that there are some things that we call direct costs, and here at the bottom are indirect costs. You can see the definitions over here on the side, but direct costs, think of them as this way. These are costs where the student is going to be billed directly from the college or university. Tuition and fees, housing and meals, or room and board, as we most commonly would talk about them, right? The ones here at the bottom are going to be variable by student. The student is going to have different levels of books and supplies that they're going to need to purchase. And whether they're done through Amazon or through the bookstore, this is going to vary by student, whether by academic program even. Transportation, personal miscellaneous is going to vary a lot by lifestyle. The student is going to need to fly home or not. Perhaps they like to take trips for spring breaks. Perhaps they need to buy shoes and they're big into sneakers. These are going to be the indirect costs because they're not going to be billed by the university and they're going to be varied quite a bit by student. Paying for college, this is what I like to talk about in terms of the buckets of funding, the buckets of money. And I put them color-coded over here. You can see them listed so that you can have an appreciation when we look at the letter and how they break it down. So students and family, college, university, the governments, state government and the federal government, as well as outside resources. The first bucket, you have the family or the student. It's going to be the more traditional ones when you think about savings, 529 or tuition, rate plans, investments, the gifts that you may receive from families, the monthly cash flow, looking at where you can save up some of the cash flow so you can afford that investment that is a college education. In blue here, you can see the college university. The significant number of your resource dollars are going to come in the form of the college universities. Oftentimes, we associate these with merit scholarships, GPA-based, traditionally speaking, but not always. College universities also will make use of the FAFSA, WASFA, or the CSS profile in order to award any need-based grants that the university has access to. So Western does not use the CSS profile. I still put this one on here so that you can have an idea that college universities do make use of some of these applications. The CSS profile, different than the FAFSA, goes into a lot more detail. Or in the state of Washington, we have also the Washington application for student financial aid. So Western uses the FAFSA and the WASFA in order to determine a student's eligibility for need-based grants. We also have talent scholarships, those also based on community service and leaderships, as well as identity and background and diverse experiences. So we have our multicultural achievement program as one example and one that we make use of that information to award some of these monies. And again, the sources here are from the college university. State government, certainly we're talking about the state of Washington, where we have our college-bound scholars, the Washington College Grant, and for students who are not eligible to fill out the FAFSA, we have the WASFA application. By and large, these ones here are going to have an element of need associated with it. College-bound scholars, a little bit of a GPA component with it, but certainly the intersection there with the financial need is going to be a characteristic of these grants that are awarded to students by the state government of Washington for Washington residents. The federal government, primarily through the FAFSA application, you can see they're listed on the bottom. The federal government does make the grant available, jobs available, as well as loans associated with students. Pell Grant is going to be the one most commonly known here. These do not need to be paid back. Jobs and loans, I want to talk a little bit about this because this is the one that provides a little bit more opportunity for conversation between students and families. Loans. Each family is going to have a differing approach to taking out loans or needing to take out loans in order to afford the college experience. My take on this is the following. If loans are absolutely going to be part of the mix, think about taking the federally backed loans first, and I'll get into more of that in a little bit. And then think about what that's going to mean later on for repayment after graduating from college. So we'll talk about that in a little bit more when we cover the actual aid letter. Jobs and work study. This is really wanted to talk about this a little bit because oftentimes when jobs and work study are featured on an aid letter, it's usually in the form of a line that says federal work study or state work study. And it's usually a dollar amount of something like $1,500. It's very important to note that $1,500 is not awarded on the front end. That $1,500 is $1,500 in the form of a $1,369 an hour job. So think of it as that $1,500 in this example, $1,500 is saved for you as a student to work at $1,369 an hour over the course of the year, right? So it's not discounted on the front end. It's not reducing your cost at $1,500. It is basically it's a funding for you to have a job on campus at $1,369 an hour. And why $1,369 an hour? That's the minimum wage in the state of Washington here. So this particular example, it's worth noting that $1,500 is not going to be reduced out, but that is saved up for you to have a job at $1,369 an hour to earn up to that $1,500. So very important to remember that if you're a student who received that federal or state work study. Other organizations, you can see there are some of the examples. I point out the ones that employers are the ones that oftentimes get overlooked. If you work for an organization or a company that sometimes don't have an opportunity for the employees to apply for a scholarship, you never know, $250, $500 here and there, it can add up. My approach to students in this one over here is that if you already have a part-time job or if you don't have a part-time job, treat the scholarship search process as your own part-time job. There are a lot of resources out there right now, and I point out 3 down here at the bottom. Make use of your time during the course of a week, 1, 2, 3, 5 hours a week. Chip away at this. It's a process that does take time, does take care to sift through the garbage, and there's a lot of garbage out there, but do take the time to chip away at it, 1 to a few hours a week. Think of that as your part-time job with the hope that you might get even some additional dollars funded your way. FAFSA float, 1, 2, 3, just to break it down very simply over here. How it works is that, number 1, students fill out the FAFSA with their parents' information, right? Income and asset information from the family. Students do their part. Federal government does its part. Federal government figures out what the EFC is. EFC, you see the definition down here. It's a dollar figure that the college universities doing their part will use this dollar figure to determine aid eligibility. So in 1, 2, 3, each person, each entity doing its part. Students and families do their bit. Federal government figures out what the EFC number is. And the college universities, because each college universities do vary by cost quite a bit. Community college costs less than a 4-year school, for example. Then the college universities use that EFC number to determine students' aid eligibility, and an aid is generated, aid letter or an aid award is generated, featured online, and sent in a paper format, in Western's case, a letter. And here's the example screenshot of what a letter looks like. Page 1 is usually going to be the welcome, the introduction, in this case here by our Assistant Vice President for Enrollment and Student Services, Clara Capron, and more of the general instruction and welcome. Page 2, and this is for Washington residents, is an example. That's where you're going to get the meat and potatoes of what is your aid. And in this one here, I want to recall that color coding that we did earlier. Blue for the college university, you can see there Admissions Merit Award. Orange for the state government, you can see there lumped in the middle, Washington College Grant, College Bound Scholarship, College State Work Study. Look at that example right there, $4,800. That means that the student can work up to $1,369 an hour, up to $4,800. And somebody with a calculator there can figure out how many hours over the course of a year and how many hours over each week a student can reasonably work to. And federal government here in red, you can see the examples of Federal Pell Grant, SCOG, the Supplemental Educational Opportunity Grant, as well as the subsidized and unsubsidized loans. I want to call out this information here on the sub and the unsub loans down here at the bottom. What the sub and the unsub difference is the interest on the loan starts accruing at the moment the loan is taken out for the unsub loan. For the subsidized loan, that interest does not begin accrual until after graduation from college. But at the unsubsidized loan, the interest starts accruing right away on day one. That doesn't mean that you need to pay that interest right off the bat. You can, and a lot of families do, because they don't want interest accruing on top of principal and accruing on top of interest over the 4 years. So what they do is that they start making payments out of that interest right away, but you don't have to. A lot of families allow that interest to get accrued over year 1, 2, 3, 4, and beyond, and then start making payment on it. Usually it's 6 months after the student graduates from college. So here's the breakdown, right? The meat and potatoes, as I put it, of what it looks like. For the non-residents here, just an example, the one thing that would not be included, of course, it would be the orange, right? Because this would be for the non-resident state of Washington. So no state of Washington dollars for non-residents. It makes sense. But in this case over here, it's quite possible that the student may have been eligible for a federal Pell Grant. And it would have shown up in that same kind of category, the red and the federal dollars. In this case over here, the student received our top award, the WWU scholarship. And you can see how it breaks it down differently. The bottom of page 2 is the same for the residents and the non-residents. I really make note of this rectangle over here where this is the place where in this box for additional funding and the next steps, in this one particular, it does list the exact difference between the cost of attendance and the total aid offered. And here you can see the listing 6 additional ideas of resources, and some of them it's going to resonate with you, right? Investments such as tuition payment plan, out-of-pocket savings, job and employment, outside scholarships, and private loans. So this is the one that oftentimes families want to know. What is the balance? What is the difference? What is my net cost? And that is listed right there at the bottom of page 2. Private loans and plus loans are ones that I oftentimes tell families to do with great care, because these two here, a credit check is required. So if you're a family that has solid credit, great, you can apply for these and there will be an option to you. If you're a family that struggled with credit, you may want to think about this very carefully and see what that would mean for you, because it is based on credit check. So it is eligible for students to apply and receive, but it's not a guarantee. So do keep that in mind. That's one of the reasons why Western does not feature the plus on the aid listing at the very top of page 2, because it does come with that risk that if your credit is somewhat, it needs a little bit of work, you may not be eligible for that as part of this funding package, right? But I do ask families to look at this with great care. And the plus loan specifically over here, different than the private loan, the terms of paying back a federal plus loans are going to be a lot easier than for paying a private loan for something like a Sallie Mae or one Nelnet, just to name a couple of these private loan servicers out there. So do keep in mind that there's a distinction between these two over here. The page 3 is going to have the information that we already reviewed earlier, right? The direct costs, you can see there, tuition fees, room and board, and the indirect cost here at the bottom. This student, particularly in this example, they had their enrollment fee deferred. Most students do pay for the enrollment fee right at the front end when they're confirming their spot in the class. But if you're a family who does manifest financial need, do talk with us so that we can then consider deferring the payment of that fee into with your tuition bill. In this case, this is what happened with this student over here. So you can see that their overall direct cost includes that enrollment confirmation fee right there. And as you're already familiar now with the breakdown of direct versus indirect costs, book supplies, personal expenses, and so on and so forth. Western, to the greatest extent possible, we receive a lot more requests for additional funding that we can possibly cover, but we are doing the best possible scenario here to meet students and families where they are in terms of our merit scholarships, Multicultural Achievement Award, which does recognize the student in their community and their personal identity, donor scholarships, alumni awards, distinguished scholarship programs for students interested in specific academic areas. You've been invited to apply for those. Western Washington grant, as I noted, also on-campus employment, as well as departmental scholarships that are going to be eligible to you once you declare your major starting in your second year and beyond. So those are available as well. My colleague Julia Iden was doing the chat session earlier today. She and I both great resources, as well as all of us on the admissions staff, to help answer any questions. But for questions specifically on your aid circumstances specifically, the best resource is truly the Office of student financial aid so they can really just drill down into the details associated with your circumstances. So I'm going to answer a couple of the questions that came up in the chat earlier today, which I think are really noteworthy. One of the ones was, who can you contact with help with your aid award? Absolutely, you can contact the Office of Financial Aid. If you have circumstances such as divorce, that's one that comes up a lot. You have a split household experience. You have a particularly tricky tax situation that requires additional review. Reaching out to financial aid is really important. Also, if the financial circumstances and situation changes after you submitted the FAFSA, remember that the FAFSA was submitted your FAFSA was submitted based on your filing from 2019. So it is quite possible during this pandemic, during this economic downturn, much has changed since. And if your family was affected quite drastically by the changes in changes in your financial circumstances, do reach out to the Office of Financial Aid, whether at Western or at other schools. This process works out the same as other schools. Reach out to them and say, hey, my circumstances changed because of these particular situations. Loss of a job, death in the family, health or educational costs that have gone through the roof. The Office of Financial Aid will reach back out to you and engage you in a conversation for something called a professional judgment review, in which they may have some latitude in making some adjustment in your aid awards. So there are some possibilities over there. And again, if your circumstances change significantly since 2019, reach out to the aid offices of the schools that you're interested in. Many students, one of the questions that came up earlier was regarding federal verification. What does it mean to be flagged for federal verification? Effectively, what happens is that when you submit the FAFSA, the federal government is going to be taking your information and say, okay, this all matches up. But about 1/3 of applications will be flagged for this verification. And don't take it personally. All it means that the feds are doing their due diligence and making sure that everything matches up, that there are no errors. Usually what they ask for is a copy of your 1040 tax returns, copy of your W-2s, copy of bank statements, for example. You can upload those automatically through the system. And once the feds get that, verify it, make sure that everything checks out, or make sure that if there are corrections needed, they will engage you in conversation with that as well. Then they will go ahead and upload that information. Everything checks out. A student's final aid award is made evident, and then you can go ahead and start verifying your aid award online. How do you do that? How do you see your award at Western and at most schools? And here's how it works. You log into your portal, you have your student credential information. And by now, most students have received an email from the Office of Financial Aid to log in and replace what we call Web for You. A couple of different tabs there. One of those tabs on financial aid specifically. And then you will see listed, very much like the aid award letter, how much you received in scholarships, in grants, in work study, and loans. My take on accepting everything is the following. Accept everything and then make the decision at the tail end whether you want to take it out or not. Well, usually the conversation is about loans and work study. The way that it works out, you got to love the train right there making all that noise. How it breaks out is the following. Work study and loans, the work study conversation goes like this. I'm not sure if I want to focus more on my academics. I'm not sure if I can take the time to work 15, 20 hours a week. Go ahead and accept the award on the front end, the work study award on the front end. It doesn't mean that you're going to get a job. It means that you have the option of getting that job coming your way. So accept now, make the decision later. Very much the same with loans. $5,500, right? That's the example that we're looking at. $5,500 in loans, accept now, decide later whether loans are going to be part of the picture at all. And even if you have up to $5,500, you might not need $5,500. Maybe you need $1,000 to make it all work out. Accept it all now. Certainly accept the free money. Check that. Drop down menu, accept it all, and then you make the decision later. Now, if you absolutely know that loans are not going to be part of your picture, or absolutely know that you're not going to be getting a job for this next academic year, go ahead and with comfort and with conviction, click decline, click submit, and go ahead and save that award process, so that Office of Financial Aid can continue their work on the back end. Will your financial aid change from year to year? It might. Two things that make a student's aid award change drastically are if they choose to live off campus and if they drop below full-time status. So if they choose to live off campus, remember that the direct costs are made up of primarily two things: tuition and fees, housing and meals, room and board, right? If your housing and meals goes away, that's $13,000 out. So now your direct cost of attendance is effectively, if you're a Washington resident, $9,000 per year. So now your aid, if you get more aid than $9,000, your aid may be affected. More often than not, what happens at the universities want to preserve your free money. So anything that's coming away that's free money, grants and scholarships, we're going to want to preserve that, absolutely. So usually what college universities do is they make adjustments in your loan eligibility and sometimes in your work study eligibility, but not very often. So moreover, more often than not, you see the adjustment in the aid eligibility for the loans. And they usually, the Office of Financial Aid, don't really mess around with the free money because they know that free money is absolutely a good thing. So keep in mind that if you're going to be moving off campus, there may be some mixing and matching of your aid eligibility in that regard. And dropping below full-time status, life happens, circumstances change where you find yourself thinking, gosh, I have so much going on, that class is really, really tripping me out, or I have some circumstances at home that are particularly difficult for me to maintain a full-time standing. Talk with the friends in the Office of Financial Aid before making a move to drop below that 12 credit hour full-time status, because it can have material changes on your financial aid. More often than not, if your financial circumstances at home do not change significantly from year to year, your aid is likely going to be similar from year to year. Okay, so just do keep that in mind. The situation at home and the economics, the finances at home are going to be the same from year to year. Your aid is going to be effectively, you can anticipate that effectively is going to be the same from year to year. However, big caveat as I say that, a big asterisk is to say that if this year FAFSA is going through a significant overhaul. So starting on October 1 for the fall 22 year, the FAFSA is going to be entirely different. The FAFSA is going to look very, very different than what we've accustomed to. So for all of the things that I said here right now, don't get too attached to it, because quite honestly, it's going to look different in a year's time, because there's already been law signed at the federal level for FAFSA to go through an overhaul. It's going to go through a significant change in about a few months' time, so that by the time October comes around and the new FAFSA for 2022 becomes available, that's going to look decidedly different. So those were some of the main questions over here. As I pointed out, talking to our friends in the Office of Financial Aid is going to be really important for you to speak with a representative who's going to know about your circumstances, reach out to them, speak with them, and connect with the resource on campus. Thank you all so much for your time and your attention. If you have any other questions, you reach out to us. Go Vikings. Take care, y'all. Bye.